So we've got 22 people plus us, so we're about 25 so far. We might have some more coming on. We're running this as a webinar, so for those of you who are not panelists, we can't see you. The only way we can hear you is if you raise your hand or chat or Q&A, and that'll be the way to communicate. I'll try to monitor and lead the interview. So I'm Reverend Kanter. I'm Senior Minister of First Unitarian Church, and so glad to have John and Sarah from Mothers Against Police Brutality. We have been in the protests, and we have been to meetings with Judge Jenkins, and we have seen you two leading the way in lots of ways, trying to make change in our city. And we join you in efforts to make change toward racial equity, which has been a focal point for us and a goal of the church itself to work toward that, and in many ways to work toward justice. And for many years, First Unitarian Church has been involved in all kinds of things, from fair housing to desegregation to deeply into women's reproductive justice and all kinds of efforts. So we're now in this chapter, and for us, continuing our racial equity work, we've been trying to just learn. We have a group that's leading a book study on just mercy, and we've been down at some of the protests, although I haven't heard much of what's going on lately. So really, this is kind of a chance to hear from you, John and Sarah, about where have we been and where are we headed. First, I think would be really good was just to hear something about who you are and why you're involved in this kind of justice work, and where did this come from for you? Just to tell us a little story about, how did you come to the work of justice in Dallas, Texas? So I'll turn it to you, and I'll try to monitor the Q&A. My follow-up question is going to be about where we've been in the last months, where we're headed. So more about who are you as people, just to get us all in the room with you.
Okay, Sarah, you want me to go? I'm John Fullenwider. I grew up in Dallas, and I began to do community work after I was a school teacher. I worked as a school teacher in the 70s, and that was when I got involved in community work. I was working mainly on gentrification issues in East Dallas and stopping displacement of homeless people. And I began, my particular contribution to that work was doing research. And as I was researching that issue, I began to research really all the other issues that were affecting poor people in Dallas. And I went to my first anti-police brutality protest, I think in 1977, with the Brown Berets. And I met the mother of Santos Rodriguez the following year, and helped her work on an appeal, a civil rights appeal in the death of her son, Santos. And I've been at it ever since. I mainly made a living as a school teacher and as a librarian. Let me just say a quick word about Mothers Against Police Brutality. This group was started in 2013 by Colette Flanagan. Her son was killed in March of that year by a Dallas police officer. Clinton Allen was 25-year-old, African-American, unarmed, that terrible night. I was the father of twin boys. And he was shot 7 times, once in the upper arm, 5 times in the chest, and once at close range in the back. The officer that killed him is still a Dallas police officer. Like so many of the 1,000 people that get killed by the police every year, there were no charges, no indictment, no trial, no conviction, no real punishment at all. He didn't miss a day of work or paid vacation. And if you were driving his beat tonight, he might be the one that stops you. So Colette wanted to do something beyond just for her own son, and she asked Sarah to help her start a group, and Sarah asked me to get involved, and so we're sometimes called the co-founders of Mothers Against Police Brutality, and Colette is the founder. Since that time, we've been doing policy work, protest work. That's where you see us mostly, is doing protest work, and working on both local and national legislation type issues to end police brutality, and also to revisit the whole idea of policing as a necessary public sector function. And so that's kind of where we are now. And Sarah?
All right.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So my name's Sarah Mokuria. I also am a daughter of Dallas. I was born here in the 80s. You know, I had a pretty eclectic and normal, whatever that means, childhood for the most part. And really, the way that my life first came into contact with policing and police brutality, well, I shouldn't say it was the first time. I don't remember as a child, but my father experienced racial profiling the majority of his life in the United States. He was a political refugee from Ethiopia. And so that had been part of his experience in the United States up until his death and his murder, which happened in 1992 by police officers, Dallas police officers, who also still work on the force as detectives. And at that time, I was 2 months shy of my 10th birthday. So I was 9 years old, closer to 10. And my father, like many people in this country, especially in Texas, who don't have access to mental health services, and because mental health issues around mental health are so stigmatized, he struggled with alcohol and marijuana use as self-medication. And so the night that he was killed, he was having a psychotic break, a drug-induced psychotic break. My mom, like many people still today, called the police for help because we don't have a system in place that that you can call anyone else. In many neighborhoods, the police are the only responders from the city. And so she called the police for help, and without telling the full story, upon their arrival, he was shot and killed in front of me, my mother, and my 1-year-old sister. And so in many ways, my life was shaped by that event. But in the 90s, when this happened, the context was very different. And still today, some of this exists, but especially then, when something like this happens to you and your family, the first question everybody would ask is, well, what did he do? And in that question of what did he do, it implies that depending on how you answer, it was either justified or not justified. And I take the position that nobody should be killed by the state in any circumstance, that we are creative people that can figure out ways to solve issues beyond killing. And so what happened for many years, I carried shame around that happening, that something was wrong with my family, something was wrong with us. And I carried that for much of the rest of my childhood, which was wrought with depression and trauma and really, I met John because I came back to Dallas after going to school. I came back to Dallas to teach, and it just so happened to be in a year where the first tenure of the current superintendent, who was trying to fire teachers and saying there were massive budget cuts. So we were organizing around that, and that's how we met. And so much of my work had been around a lot of different issues, education, injustices, anti-war. And my policing work was helping, my anti-brutality work was helping other families, but not really leading with my own story. And it wasn't until I met Colette, and in the same way I had been doing with other families, trying to help her, that she helped me also be more open and forthright about my own personal story. And so I am a proud co-founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality, and this has been work that is, for me, is healing. This is how I heal, and this is how I honor my father and the 9-year-old girl who lost so much of her childhood. And so I appreciate and applaud your congregation, Reverend Kanter, for being brave and being in this work with us, walking alongside with us. And so I thank you for that, and I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you. And I think I can speak for all of the participants. Thank you both for being here, and thank you also for leading with your heart and the vulnerability of the trauma that especially you, Sarah, leads you into this. The notion that justice work can be spiritually healing, or the healing of a life trauma, is also an important aspect for us to consider. There's a spiritual quality to that, that's not just fighting a law, but really fighting to make the world a better place for other people, as a way of also making your mark in the world. And so we honor you, and we honor you both for that. So thanks. And again, if you're a participant and have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. So I guess the first thing I'd like to just to kind of get us up to speed with is, the pre and post George Floyd activity that Mothers Against Police Brutality have been involved with. Obviously, George Floyd is a global, what would you call it? A ignition of activity around the world. I mean, watch a soccer game in Germany and everybody's kneeling for the first 30 seconds of the game for Black lives. And, we've seen cities trying to make adjustments to their policies, and we've seen all kinds of things. So for you two, tell us the story. What was your life pre George Floyd and post George Floyd? Is it any different? Is there something particularly about that moment that has changed what your focus is, or how you're going about trying to draw attention to these issues of police brutality?
So I'll start in saying that we are in a particularly special moment, in that we are in the midst of a cultural uprising sparked by the horrendous killing of George Floyd, and also Breonna Taylor and Tony McCade. And I think that the combination of forces between us being in the middle of a global pandemic, when so much of life as we've known it has been suspended, rules have been suspended, life has changed for everybody around the world, and to also see how white supremacy continues to kill Black folks, whether it be through state-sanctioned violence or through vigilante racism that we've also seen happen in this moment sparked a conversation that for us has been an everyday conversation. And so the reality is the work of Mothers Against Police Brutality often is in the spotlight when there are these national cases that galvanize everyone. But the reality is 3 people on average are killed every single day. Every 3 seconds, a Black person comes into contact with a police officer. And so the work of Mothers Against Police Brutality, unfortunately, is 24/7 work. And so it's hard for me to say how the moment how this moment has changed. I think it's just that the work has become more visible for us in this moment, but and maybe more intense in the sense that moments like this, where the world is paying attention, offer us opportunities to make bigger and bolder and stronger intervention. But it is a constant work that we've been in every single day.
Yeah, I'd say it's a break and a threshold moment, but there's also a lot of continuity. As Sarah mentioned, I mean, by the time George Floyd was killed, there'd been over 400 people killed by the police this year. And if I started reading a list of names, no one would know who they are at all. And then the other thing I guess I'd like to stress is that, particularly in Dallas, many people are unaware that every single horror that you see in the few national cases that get media attention each year, we've experienced it here in Dallas. In 2004, we had a man named Alan Simpson choked to death by 2 officers. And then just in 2016, we had that man's name was Alan Simpson. In 2016, we had Tony Timpa. He wasn't choked with this particular chokehold, but 3 officers held him down, a knee in his back and his face in the dirt for 14 minutes while he said, "You're going to kill me, help me, help me." And he had actually called for help. He had a panic attack after using cocaine, and he called for help, completely unarmed, and he ended up dead. Nothing ever happened to those officers. In fact, the family's wrongful death suit was thrown out of court just 2 days ago. So the other aspect of police brutality, both here and nationally, is that there's very little accountability. I mean, the number of officers that are actually indicted each year usually runs about 7 out of 1,000. The number of people convicted is not even statistically significant, maybe 3, maybe not even that. And the record in Dallas, a lot of people think we're doing really good here. We are not. From the 70s, from the death of Santos Rodriguez, which did result in a murder conviction, to the death of Botham Jean, which also resulted in a murder conviction. Over 4 decades, there was no convictions, none, in hundreds of killings. And I've spent a lot of time going back through those, and every single thing, kill a child, yes, it's happened here. Kill an unarmed elderly person, it's happened here. Kill an unarmed a person who doesn't understand the commands that are being shouted at him in English, that's happened here. And many, many others. And so the situation in Dallas is not different than the situation that you have heard about often in other police departments around the country. So what we've done, we took a lot of the things that we've been working on, and with some other organizers and faith leaders, we put together a document called 10 New Directions for Public Safety and Positive Community Change. And this was really a memo to the county judge, Clay Jenkins, we produced at his request. So it doesn't read like a manifesto or something that you might be proud of literary wise. But we laid out 2 basic approaches to this crisis. And the unrest following George Floyd's death demonstrates more than any case recently, the depth of the crisis, because it wasn't just that Floyd was killed in a live streamed cruel manner, although that did happen, but it was that how the cruelty and the racism and the sense of white supremacy, and even the look on the officer's face and his hands in his pockets, it all was too familiar to people of color. And it reminded them of all the unmet needs that really stem from the same unjust system. So anyway, the two approaches that we came up with were, one was to change policing, restrict the use of deadly force, have more accountability, and we can go in more detail later, but have more accountability and transparency when an officer does kill someone. And you might consider those to be harm reduction in a bad situation. And then the other side of this 10 New Directions is about making deep community investments in housing and in healthcare and in mental health care in particular, and in the spaces that people have to live in, the living conditions that people have. So just for instance, you take the case of a homeless person sleeping in public, which is still illegal in Dallas and which people still get arrested for. And so the homeless person sleeping in public, it's a crisis intervention usually. If someone calls, this guy's sleeping on the sidewalk, they'll send police to get him. And sometimes they take him to jail. And that takes about 4 hours. So half their shift is picking up a homeless person and taking them to jail for the night. And then the other thing is that it usually doesn't go that smoothly, sometimes the homeless person gets kicked and beaten and shoved, and sometimes they get killed. And so our approach here would be that crisis intervention would not be handled by the police, not by armed police. And then that's the crisis point, that we want to change policing. And then the other thing is to go upstream from there. Why is this man laying on the street? Why is there nowhere for him to get out of the elements? What unmet personal and social needs, starting with the housing crisis, leads to this crisis intervention point that then, because there's no other institution taking care of this point, we send an armed policeman to somehow solve the homelessness crisis, in America. And so because of that, that's why we need a new direction. And that's why people talk about defunding the police. And this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll pass it, but if you take the amount of money we spend on police and put it in a bar graph, and then the amount of money on homelessness prevention and put it there, it would look like, the Empire State Building and a pencil laying on the ground. I mean, there's over $500 million spent on policing in this city every year. And the amount, and every year around budget time, the libraries, the recreation centers, the cultural centers, the arts, the senior services, homelessness, they're all fighting, trying to keep alive as a public service. And the police are over here saying we need more money, and they're getting more money every year. So it's a double crisis. It's not just a budget discussion, and it's not just a police brutality discussion, but it's opened a window on both aspects of the crisis in policing.
Yeah. Okay, we have some questions coming in. I just want to mention again, if there's a Q&A button, you can type some in, and we'll get to those in a minute. But Sarah, before we get a little deeper into the 10 New Directions, I want to address this thing about, is it peculiar in Dallas that we have all these events and nobody knows about them? Or is this does this happen in every city? Because, I think about it I think about Dallas in some sense. I think we're getting better at it, but like the JFK Memorial, which feels to me like a walled off thing until we had the 50th anniversary, it seemed like Dallas didn't want to talk about that event. Is it the same with these? If you're telling us we've had hundreds of killings and brutal events, but we don't know about them. Is that particular to Dallas, or is that everywhere?
Oh, no, that's a phenomenon that we see everywhere. And I think part of the issue is, and John really eloquently laid it out, is that The reality is, the strategy of our city, and not just our city, our county and cities all over this state and all over this country, the strategy has been to criminalize and use the police as the police are the enforcers of an unjust system, and they are lawless. Um, Police are lawless and above the law. They are not held to a higher standard. They are not held to a standard, and so I think that that's important because when we acknowledge the fact that, and John described like the Empire State Man, the Empire State Building as the police budget, I also think of it as like a Pac-Man. When you look at the city budget, the police budget is the Pac-Man that eats the rest of the budget. And so when we as a society allow for the investment strategy or the policy solution to be criminalize everything instead of solving those issues, when we pay attention to that, when we know, then we become responsible. So I think it's easier for some folks to be ignorant of the issue because it feels overwhelming. A lot of people don't know what is the entry point. How do I get involved? What do I do? That's not my own personal experience. I have so many other things that I need to do in my life, and so it's easier to ignore. But I think that moments like this remind us that, like, once you know, it pricks your conscience, and you know that you're choosing to be on one side or the other. And I think the idea that, or not the ideas, but the ethos that Dallas has operated on for so long is to create a historical amnesia, right? You know, I mean, even if you look at the infrastructure, everything is torn down and new things are put. So there is what history? Everything's new. It's a new day in Dallas every single day. It's a perfect city. And when you acknowledge that Tesfaye Mokuria and Clinton Allen and Fred Bradford Jr. and Santos Rodriguez and Genevieve Dawes and Etta Collins and all these people have been brutally killed in this city, then we become responsible. Then we have to do something because it is done in our name. These investments are done with our dollars, and these policies are made by the people that we elect who represent us. And so we are all responsible, and that's an uncomfortable reality. But I think that the reason that so many people ignore it is because it is an uncomfortable and difficult reality to face, and there aren't always clear visions of where to go. And that's why that we're having this conversation today, because we do have a path forward. And as John said, the harm reduction strategies in terms of mitigating how police operate are short-term solutions to an issue that is as old as this country. But really where we have to put our North Star is, how do we fundamentally shift the way we operate? How do we create a society based on collective care? And so how do we move the investments that our city makes with our money through the budget? How do we move that into a collective care model? So instead of criminalizing homeless people, the unhoused get the services that they need. Instead of criminalizing youth, there are services and pathways to a brighter future there are investments in that way. Instead of criminalizing the use of drugs, we address it as a mental health and as a public health issue, so that people are served and have the ability to live in this world with dignity. And so that is the fundamental shift that we are pushing for. how do we move to a system of collective care and delegitimize a violent system being police as the intervention point?
That sounds great. I mean, for us supporting compassion and justice, we always talk about what we as a church want to do is work toward those goals. Can we make compassion and justice sort of two sides of a coin? That's what I'm hearing you say. So before we get too many questions here, I want to knock some of these out. Just quickly on you started naming those who were Dallas area citizens who've been murdered. There's a list of that somewhere. Someone's asking where they can get that. Is that on the website?
John is, reach out to John. We have lists all over. John has compiled more. Actually, I should just be quiet and let John.
There is no comprehensive list of the people that have been killed by the Dallas Police Department prior to 2003. And the list that they have, you can get it from the police website, and I'll put that up later, in the thing. The state of Texas has a death in custody database that has everybody that's died in custody since 2005. And those are pretty good lists. One thing you have to remember about a police database is that it's the police story. In other words, there's no third party that checks those databases. And for instance, Clinton Allen was shot in the back. Jason Harrison was shot in the back. Andrew Gagne was shot in the back. You'll never see someone shot in the back on the Dallas Police Department's database of officer-involved shootings. It just says the officers emptied their guns because they, feared for their lives. We told you that Clinton Allen is unarmed. He was unarmed that night by any definition of being armed. But when you go to the Dallas Police Department's database of officer-involved shootings, it'll show that he was armed with these two things, his hands. So, it is a raw database, and it does give you a list of people who've been killed.
But there's no comprehensive one list somewhere like on your website yet? Okay.
No, but I would suggest, John has a really great presentation. It's a lengthy presentation where he tells the history in Dallas and amplifies a lot of these stories. And so I think maybe a follow-up if there is interest. I'm offering John
that sounds
without
well,
voluntold into that one, yeah.
We're currently looking at 20 killings that are particularly troublesome, trying to get the city manager to get an outside agency to review these cases. And I could go through those cases. I won't go through those cases, but we could make that list available to you, Dan.
All right, great. Let's go into the 10 new directions a little bit. The questions that are coming in around that are like, who's listening to that? Who's leading with it? Is it Judge Jenkins? Is he taking this as an agenda? And I'm gonna have to go let my dog. So you guys talk. I'm gonna open the door.
Well, so the Judge Jenkins has really taken what the 10 directions says to heart and has been moving. Currently, John and I, along with many others, are serving on a county-wide working group with 7 city managers, looking at points number 1 and 2 on the 10 directions, and we're really focused on identifying alternative responses outside of police. So how do we mitigate touch points between police officers and the community, and what do those investments look like? So we're currently in that process. There was a meeting last Wednesday. There will be another one this Wednesday. You can look on the county website for the link for that. I believe it's going to be again this week at 2 p.m. and you can watch, you can comment, you can add questions. So that is a process that is currently happening. The other thing is, I think Frederick Douglass said it best when he said, "Power concedes nothing without demand." And so we have had 10 city council members in the city of Dallas put out a memo putting making it known to the city manager that their priority was looking at in this budget how money could be divested from the police and invested in other priorities within the city. But for that process to happen, it's going to require all of us to take part in it. And so the county judge is taking it seriously. We have some city councilors who are taking it seriously, and people are grappling with it at various levels and degrees of interest. But in order to make these a reality, we all have to be activated and participate. And I saw one of the questions, so I'll just lead that into this was, well, what do we do, or how do we get involved? So Our City, Our Future has created a toolkit so that all of us can lead individual self-led conversations around the budget. So the idea is that you could become an ambassador, which would be a facilitator. You choose 5 to 10 of your friends, and you either meet in person, which I wouldn't suggest right now given the numbers of COVID cases, but you could meet in a Zoom call or over the phone. And we give you a full toolkit where you can go through what your priorities in the budget should look like. How do you think? If you think that the police, the Pac-Man eating everything else is not right, well, how would you allot that money? And the idea is that you go through this process, you share that information with us, and we create what we call the people's budget. So that when we go into the budget conversations in August 11th, the city manager will present the first draft of the budget, which most likely will not be the budget that we want to see, that we are all prepared with the people's budget to go into these meetings and say, this is what we want. We want investments in the arts. We want investments into social workers. We want investments into a collective care model. And I don't have all the answers. I think that all of us have to look at our communities and say, what is it that we need? Last year when we went through this process, a lot of the senior citizens mentioned, sometimes I call the police because out of loneliness, no one checks on me. I don't have family around, and I don't have anyone else to interact with. We need to invest in the networks that make everyone feel safe and cared for outside of a violent policing system. So I will drop a bit.ly in this chat so that people who want to participate in that process can get involved.
The budget process is a lengthy one, but citizens don't usually get into it until pretty much the very end. And what's happening right now is the city council is on retreat, and they're not meeting in the month of July. Their next meeting is probably might be the 5th or the 13th maybe, or something like that, of August. What date is it?
11th.
The 11th. And that'll be a meeting where the city manager goes through the budget that he's created. And the reason we're meeting with city managers this month is to try to get ahead of that and see if we can't influence what these managers take to the table. We have city managers from Irving and DeSoto involved in this county-wide discussion. But the biggest budget is the city of Dallas, and it's the police force with the biggest damage as well, just because of the size of the city. One thing we did with some theater groups is we had and I'll put my email address up, or I'll just send all this to you, Pastor Kanter. But we had there's one email address that you can send stuff to the mayor and all the members of the city council in one email. And we can just, with them, we just did a sample letter that I've read the 10 new directions, I support it, and my particular interest is, and then put that out there. We're looking for a big tent as far as advocates go. If you don't feel you have all the answers to policing, like we don't feel we have all the answers, but if you think there needs to be a shift in budget priorities towards things that provide safety and security in other ways besides having an armed policeman on each corner, then there's a space for you in this movement. The second thing you can do is the budget meetings this year. Usually they have them in their districts, but I'm thinking they'll be virtual this year probably because the city council meetings themselves are.
They are. They've already announced that they'll be virtual.
Right. So people can sign up to go to those meetings, and there'll be some publicity on that in the news media, and the group that's doing the sort of imagination type workshops, imagine your own budget workshops, they'll have a lot of that on their website and Facebook page, and that's Our City, Our Future, and you'll get that from when Sarah sends the other link.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So writing, going through a budget exercise where you submit your ideas in an organized way, with us, and then attending virtually those budget hearings where they hear calls for change. That would be very helpful, and it would be a lot more than is usually done on the city budget process.
Okay, so just to be clear, the Budget Ambassador program is open source. They can go to the Mothers Against Police Brutality website and find some information about that. Right?
Yeah, it's actually, and we will put it on the Mothers Against Police Brutality Facebook page, but it's on the Our City, Our Future Facebook page. It's also on In Defense for Black Lives Coalition.
Okay, which is what's the Our City, Our Futures?
So Our City, Our Future is a collective of women of color and non-gender conforming folks who came together last year to focus specifically on the budget. And so it's part of Mothers Against Police Brutality is working with Our City, Our Future, with In Defense Coalition, as John mentioned, with the theaters across the city. As he described it, it's a big tent of a lot of different folks who are all working towards the same goal and same mission. And so Our City, Our Future has taken the lead on creating a toolkit to help people get involved and get activated in the budget cycle.
And it's ourcityourfuture.org?
Yes, the website is ourcityourfuturedallas.org. And then I'll put it in this chat box as well, but there's a bit.ly that I added. And you can go on online.
You did that. Okay, yeah. Thank you. No, I'm keep going.
That was, I think we've repeated the same.
All right.
I said it again, so hopefully you got it.
All right. So the 10 directions, we're getting help in the chat box too. The 10 directions is also, there's a link in our chat box. And there's some other things. So if participants don't know where that is, if you go down, you just kind of drag, if you're on the computer, drag down to the bottom of this Zoom screen and click on chat, and you'll see. And so we have some other questions, and we're into our last sort of 15 minutes. A couple of questions, just to change the direction, just briefly here, are kind of around police unions and the hiring of compassionate police. How do you fundamentally change that? I remember as a kid, there was this big bully in my high school, and I was on the ambulance. I became a medic as a high schooler. I was like responding to all kinds of calls, and this kid was like a year ahead of me, and he was like the kind of kid you went the other direction when you saw coming down the hallway. And I show up at a call, like an ambulance call one day, and here comes that kid in a uniform with a gun and a stick and a badge. And I'm thinking, is this who gets hired to, like, how does that happen? They gave the worst kid in the whole town, the most power. I mean, how do you change this? Is there a way to attract people into police work that are not those people, that are the more compassionate people? And then the other sort of side of this is where are the police unions in all of this? Are they resisting the change? Is there conversation with the police union? What's happening with it? So sort of address those issues if you can.
So I see those are two parts, and I'll take part of it, and I know John has a lot to say about it as well. But one is policing is fundamentally violence, and so it attracts that part in people. We've created this narrative around the hero with the badge and the helper with the badge, but the reality is policing is violent. Fundamentally, all policing is violent. And and so going back to this idea, which has for a long time felt like a radical notion, but moving away from the idea of criminalization and policing into a collective care model where we don't, I think that under Obama, under the Obama administration, there was a move towards community policing, which Dallas has been a leader in the community policing model, which is, getting officers into the community and connected and knowing folks. And under that model, we've continued to have people killed. We've continued to have people hurt, sexually harassed, all kinds of things by officers. And so what I would say is that policing as a system fundamentally does not serve us as a community, and we need to expand our imagination beyond policing as something that needs to exist in our community and in our society. And as it relates to the police unions, I cannot overemphasize the power and control that they play within our electoral system, and in terms of how policies are created around the police department. So currently the current meet and confer agreement that came out of the Dallas Police Association was from 2019, and it lives until 2022. And I can drop that into this chat as well, so that people can read what has been negotiated. But it would be wonderful for us to start thinking about and start gearing up to how we help move our elected officials away from being in those negotiating conversations with the police association. We must delegitimize that association's power. We all know how horrific Botham Jean's murder was in his home, and it was the Dallas Police Association who interfered with that process, who protected Amber Geiger, who from the trial we learned showed up on the scene and was giving commands to the officers on the scene who were treating it as it should have been treated, as a murder. And so this is a very problematic association, and one of the calls that Mothers Against Police Brutality has been making for a long time is to hold our elected officials accountable for not accepting campaign donations from the police association. So I'll stop there so that John can jump in.
Well, I can almost categorically say that the police association has opposed every reform and every attempt at legitimate oversight from the 1960s to now. And they are quite influential in local elections. But let me say this: if you had asked the police chief of Minneapolis the day before George Floyd was killed, if you had asked him how things are going, he'd sound like our police chief. He'd say, things are going pretty well. We've got our anti-bias training going. We've got our Have Coffee with a Cop program. We've got our community policing, and we're doing a lot of data-based policing, and things are going pretty well. Never realizing that his city would be on fire in 24 hours because of the rot at the base of some of these police departments. There is an officer like Derek Chauvin on every police department in this country. And there are at least 20 of them in Dallas, because that's how many people were picked up on social media with racist and Islamophobic and joking about police brutality social media posts. So right now, almost every public official is trying to find the magic words to take us back to the normal before George Floyd got killed. But like I said, like we said earlier, George Floyd's killing was one of 400 or more this year, and the program. I mean, you might think, oh, okay, they're killing that many people. It's probably like someone's robbing a bank and they have to go kill them. That's not the case at all. And the unarmed killings are usually someone maybe acting in an aberrant way, someone running away from the police, or someone who just doesn't obey commands fast enough because they're having a psychic breakdown, or someone that struggles with the police. If you're having a psychic breakdown and two armed people start grabbing you and shoving you to the ground, actually, you're going to resist. I mean, it's as easy as to predict as if I could punch you in the face right now, Reverend Kanter. You'd probably resist. At least you'd do something, like it's not what it seems like when we talk about our heroes in uniform. That's not what's happening. And the idea that most cops are good and a few cops are bad, well, that's an idea that remains to be tested. It's true that most cops don't even fire their weapon ever in their career as a police officer. But it's also true that very, very few cops will tell the truth about when another officer does it. I mean, how many times does an officer come forward and say, yeah, this killing was terrible? Even if they were there, they don't. They generally don't. And so
fast.
It's a culture that, there's a culture of policing that you see it's not all bad, but you see the rot in it. And we're the 99.5% supposedly good cops to tell us that Amber Geiger had racist and joking about police brutality social media posts, And it's because we don't know the facts of the matter, we have an illusion about policing in the country. Like, for instance, I'll bet most people in the listening to us now don't realize that less than half the cops even do patrol. There are 3,000 cops in Dallas, and when you call, that's not how many people are there to take calls. Less than half of them take it. We have a top-heavy administrative structure. We have so many police corporals that there's probably more police corporals than there are people to supervise, And so the thing is, there's a lot in that 500 million, there's a lot of money. And it's not that you might say, well, why can't we just fund all this stuff that we want without defunding the police? But when you hit the budget this year and they look at this recession from the coronavirus, it's going to be scraps on the floor unless the issue is brought front and center that we need to spend money differently. Let me just say one other thing, because I'm going to anticipate the question. What happens after, who am I supposed to call when someone robs me? Sarah? After y'all get rid of the police. That's not, you need to think of it like this. When you call 911 now, if you've been robbed, it takes an hour or so for someone to get there. The robber's already gone. So a person with a clipboard could do that call. Most fender benders, no, they don't even want to come out. Just solve it yourself. Call your insurance company. But it doesn't mean that there's not a safety function that has to be met in the society. But you could do it a lot fairer and juster and with less cost, going in the direction we're talking about going. Well, we're basically, if you're thinking about, I'll be scared if the police aren't there. Think about this. We're basically funding racial profiling, police brutality, and over-policing. I mean, we're not even confronting the paradox. And just think about this when someone says, well, gosh, we need the police. Where the police are most active is where the crime is the highest. And I don't mean like it was high crime and they went in and then it changed. It's the same areas year after year. And so if you're over policing an area and it's still a high crime area, you're not taking the right approach to crime. You know, you can't just flood a hotspot by a 7-Eleven and then 6 months later you leave and everything's the same except you didn't flood the hotspot this weekend and then somebody robs the 7-Eleven. So we're rethinking it because it's not working, not because it's protecting the prosperous people from the horrible criminals, you know? And even the most prosperous people don't feel safe in this system because if they did, they wouldn't hire so many private security guards to patrol their neighborhood.
There's so much more to talk about. There's the militarization of the police. There's the question of how did the policemen in Minneapolis have 18 citations? You know, I was talking with the University Park police chief this past week, a week ago. We organized some clergy to talk to him, and he said, you know, that, and I don't know if this is just a small police station with a lot of money, but he said, you know, they get one use of force and they get called in. They get 3 use of force citations, and there's a big review process, and you know, it's all internal, of course, but it seemed to me like they had that under control. He said if somebody had 18 citations, that guy would be deep in the recesses of the records department. I mean, so I don't know, like there's so much more to talk about in terms of that. The racial issues that are just running rampant in our country right now are also deep into this conversation. So I don't know how do you want to close, how do you want to end with a few minutes left? And then just quickly, there was a question about, what about other counties? Like some of our attendees live in Collin County and things like that. So how do you want to close? And can you kind of address the surrounding counties, what people can do in terms of that?
So to the point about University Park, the district attorney, John Creuzot, eloquently stated in the last meeting that we had with the working group that the reality is in this county and across this country, but he was speaking about this county, we have 2 policing systems, one for people of color and poor folks and one for everyone else. And so the fact that that wouldn't happen in University Park, where the median income level is higher than the average in Dallas, where the majority of people who live there are white, there's no surprise that that is not the type of policing apparatus that you have there. And really, when you look at police forces like University Park and Highland Park, policing is really not about policing the people who live there, but making sure the people who don't live there stay out of there. Like that's the function that they play, right?
Right. We addressed that with them too. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Sarah froze up.
Oh, okay. Well, she may come back in while I'm trying to talk, but I would like to
work on Oakland Avenue with that police force in my old Buick. But so, you know, to answer the question about what do you do in other cities or other counties, you look at your police budget, you look at what's going on there, and you can really mimic some of the same strategies that we're using here. But part of it is figuring out, finding a team, even a small team of folks who are able to start doing that research, making those requests of the data to understand what is actually happening. Collin County, that is I don't envy you because there is a lot of work to do in Collin County, but really looking at how money is being spent, what are the policies, and digging into them, and you can look at all of the things that we're talking about for Dallas County. There are all those issues and that much more there. And so building a base of power with people, I think we are too often unaware of the power that we have in the collective power. And I can't, it's hard to do this on video, but I'll try anyways. But this is how I'll end, is like, if this piece of paper were me, and I was speaking out to the powers that be, they would probably just tear me down, right? But if there were two of us, it'd be a little bit more difficult to tear. But then if there were four of us, it'd be a little bit more difficult. And the more people that you have, the more difficult it becomes to tear them down, which is what we're seeing in this cultural uprising. One of my favorite moments around policing was in 2015 in Cleveland. There was a young man who I was at a Movement for Black Lives convening. There were thousands of Black folks who had come from all over the country. And we found out that a young man, a teenager, was stopped by the equivalent of the DART police, the Cleveland Transit Police. And we all rushed, he was in custody. We all rushed to that spot, and we surrounded the police car, and we demanded that he be let go. We were maced, we were threatened, but there were more of us than there were of them, and they let him go. And I'm not making this up, like a monarch butterfly just appeared out of nowhere and was flying over us. And it still brings me so much joy, because it reminds me of the power that we have. And so we have to surround these issues with force, like the force of all of us, the people together. As we say in the streets, the people united will never be defeated. And it's true. And so find your people. We are your people.
Well, we're your people too. So, most of the people on this call are church members, and just so we're allies, and we want to be involved. So, John, any final?
Well, let me just close with a story about a kid named Brandon Washington. Brandon Washington was a teenage Black guy, lived in Pleasant Grove. He got in an argument with a 7-Eleven clerk and left the store, and she called 911 and said that he had stolen a candy bar from her store. And so police came out, they started searching the area, they were driving around. One officer was working one car and one in another. And first officer saw Brandon walking toward him and stopped and hollered at him to, stop, and what are you doing, and all that. And Brandon at first, said, up yours, I'm not doing anything. And then he decided he would cooperate, so he started walking toward him. This was a period where many people wore sagging pants. He had his hand on his waist, kind of holding up his jeans. And the officer thought he saw him reach for a gun, and he shot Brandon. He killed him. And his name was Martin Rivera. And he was no charges, no indictment, no trial, no nothing. And he continued his career in Pleasant Grove, and all went well. A few years later, in the most famous recent case of police violence, deadly police violence, Amber Geiger shot an unarmed man who was 26 years old, an unarmed Black man named Botham Jean. And most of us know that case. And it came out during the trial. There was an officer that she described as her mentor, her partner, the man that taught her how to be a policeman. And turned out later that they also were more intimately involved. And in fact, she was texting this officer the night she killed Botham Jean. And that officer's name was Martin Rivera. And this is an example I use it as an example of how unaccountable policing reaches out from the past and grabs you by the throat in the future. And this chain of unaccountable use of deadly force in Dallas and around the country has led us to this moment. And it's why many people are calling for defunding the police department and funding other ways of feeling safe and secure. And it's a genuine crisis. Even if the only contact I might have with police officers is planning a protest or getting a traffic ticket myself. But this is a terrible crisis. We also should remember that nobody shot by the police has been convicted of anything. You know, they haven't been convicted of any crime. When you go to the Texas Death in Custody database, there's always a line that says, well, it's the highest charge they could have been charged with. And half the time it's shoplifting, speeding, something that wouldn't give you the death penalty if you admitted to doing it, you know. So we have got a terrible crisis here, and we're offering several creative ways to try to address it. And it's a moment, it's a threshold moment, and we do need to seize the moment. Yes. and get over our illusions about what the function of the police is and what we really need to be safe and secure. Yeah. And thank you for having this, and I really appreciate it.
I thank you both, John and Sarah. This has been really important and really, really enlightening. I know you spoke at the church during a surge meeting at one point. I saw in the chat. So we're no strangers to you, and we hope you become we become your allies in the work going forward. We will see who attended and can start these ambassador budget reviews. And I think one thing, John, you and I talked about is trying to create a little bit of a letter to support Judge Jenkins in the 10 new directions. And we can we'll work on that in the next.
We can get that done in the morning, this weekend.
We can push that out through our Facebook page and our website. So thanks everybody. We're a little over time, but this is really wonderful. We could probably speak for another hour or more. But everybody's got lives here, and Sarah and John probably doing this all day and every day. We'll keep the revolution moving forward, and we thank you, and we look forward to the next steps with this effort in the world. Thanks everybody for attending tonight, and be well.
Thank you, Reverend Kanter. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Stay safe.